morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, which is focused on biodiversity, potential impacts on plants and projects. I'm going to wait another minute before starting, since the starting time is 9 a.m. London time and 10 a.m. Rome time. Okay, great. It's 9 o'clock in the UK and 10 o'clock in Italy. And it's my pleasure to introduce you a great panel of speakers today. We will focus on biodiversity, potential impacts on plants and projects by focusing on the UK and in particular on the Greater Manchester case study. I will just introduce briefly the topic of the day and the great panelists, and then I will give the room to the panelists to make sure that the time is all well used on discussing what is going on in the UK on biodiversity and how this can be translated in lessons usable for planners, decision makers, architects, and designers in the Italian context. So biodiversity is gaining increased popularity all around the world, obviously, but in particular in the UK context. Recently, last winter, a new document, the economics of biodiversity, the Dasgupta review, has been issued, and this document focuses on the importance of biodiversity for economic systems. So this review is definitely groundbreaking because it emphasized the importance of biodiversity for an healthy socio-economic growth. Obviously, carbon emissions needs to be cut. We need to make this transition from a fossil fuel driven context towards a new world in which fossil fuels are not the drivers of our economy. However, biodiversity is equally relevant to our survival on this planet. Everybody needs to play a role. What are the implications on our job and our profession as planners, spatial planners, architects, and designers? This is the question that we will try to answer today by offering a variety of case studies at different scales in order to support colleagues in Italy to transfer lessons to their own everyday context. In the UK, biodiversity net gain will soon become a mandatory requirement. I won't expand on this because we are fortunate enough to have Nick White with us today, who will, with a much more authority, clarify what is going on in terms of embedding biodiversity net gain into the spatial planning practice and how it relates to the current regulatory context. The key point is that we are shifting in the UK towards a new approach in which land management and development will be aimed at leaving the natural environment in a measurably better state than it was beforehand. And there is a strong momentum and political commitment towards this goal. So it is a groundbreaking approach, which obviously will be reflected and mirrored in the practice. However, still we can have a variety of inspirational projects, and our focus will be on Manchester. So first of all, we will have the opportunity to hear from Krista Patrick what's going on in the Greater Manchester area, which is a key city region situated in the northwest part of England, and it expressed a very strong political commitment towards embedding biodiversity in spatial planning at different scales. We will then have the opportunity to learn from cases which are already embedding, even though not explicitly, biodiversity in their initiatives. Greening the city is something which we all would like to see, but how to achieve it is a big challenge. Pete Stringer will talk about how City of Trees is making Manchester greener. Noura Hesham from the University of Salford will present a groundbreaking project, Ignition, in which nature-based solutions are assessed for their contributions also in terms of biodiversity. Sophie Shane from the Manchester City Council will present a Grow Green project which supported citizens' well-being and health in an area which was in need of green new spaces. And finally, Mark Champion from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust will share with us great initiatives to make sure that the wildlife is embedded in the real plans of the area of Wigan. So altogether, these projects are not just theoretical projects. These are all extant case studies which are producing outcomes and can be useful insights for Italian planners, architects, and designers. Finally, Piero Pellizzaro, who is the director of Resilient Cities in the city of Milano, will offer a perspective of how all these fantastic examples can be translated into the Italian context and become, therefore, useful tools in the toolkit of planners and architects in Italy. I don't want to steal any longer to the great speaker of today, and I will now give the floor to Nick White, Principal Advisor, Net Gain at Natural England, London, UK. Thank you very much, Nick, for your time today.
Thank you, Claudia, and good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be joining you this morning as well. So I'm just going to share my slides with you. So yeah, so as Claudia said, I'm a Principal Advisor for Biodiversity Net Gain for Natural England. So we advise government on environmental policy and practice in England. And today I'm just going to talk to you about the approach to biodiversity net gain that we've adopted, how we got there, and what this is going to mean for the future. So to start with, we see, and I think biodiversity net gain presents a fantastic opportunity. There's a real opportunity here to deliver outcomes for nature, so to address the environment and the kind of crisis in nature that we're all aware of, and which Claudia was talking about, but also real opportunities to help to deliver better outcomes for people and for communities in the places in which we all live and work as well. So to provide opportunities for people to have greater contact with nature, more engagement with nature. But there's also economic benefits from this as well. We can, by embedding the natural environment, nature, kind of right in the heart of the development process, and be thinking about it from the outset, we can help make that process smoother. We can help make the planning process smoother, so kind of reducing the kind of time that projects can take to get through planning. There's also opportunities as well to deliver kind of growth and employment opportunities as well in the sector. So opportunities for new jobs in the natural environment. So although it focuses on nature and biodiversity, there are these other benefits from it as well, in terms of benefits to people, places, and the economy as well. But before going further, what are we actually talking about when I'm saying biodiversity net gain? I'm not sure about in Italy, but Lego is very popular in England, and this is an attempt to kind of try and simply illustrate what's meant by biodiversity net gain using an example of Lego. So at the top of the screen, you've got a situation where there was an area of woodland. Development's taken place. There's been a nice kind of block of flats has been created as a result of that. But the nature that was there has been lost. It's gone, and you've had a net loss in biodiversity. And we're trying to completely change that and say, actually, that's not good enough. It's not good enough for nature. It's not good enough to address the biodiversity crisis that we're in. It's also not good enough for the people that are going to be living in those flats. So we want to change this to see a world where actually we're creating a positive legacy. So that development process can actually result in more nature, greater opportunities to interact with wildlife than was there to start with. And what's significant about this is, in that top example, that project wasn't doing anything wrong. It's entirely legal. It was meeting all kind of environmental policies that we currently have in England. It was meeting protected species legislation, etc. But generally, what happens is you get this overall loss in nature, and we're trying to completely reverse that and say, actually, no, we want to have an outcome that sees a positive legacy for nature. This hasn't happened overnight. So this has been developing over the best part of almost a decade of work now. And it very much led through a partnership approach. So working on kind of best practice principles with professional bodies as well. So working with ecologists, working with kind of landscape, design professionals, planning colleagues, to work together to look at actually what would be best practice when it came to biodiversity net gain, and what could we learn from international practice. We also began work on developing and implementing kind of voluntary standards that sectors could use. So integrating this into kind of building standards, so something that developments could aspire towards achieving, and also creating the kind of what became, or what has become, the first ever British standard for biodiversity net gain. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. We also began work on the first early metric as well, so a mechanism for measuring the impacts a project would have on nature. And that was quite key. Up until that point, projects had no way of measuring or understanding what their impact on nature was. They could measure their carbon impacts, they could measure their impact on water, but never nature. So this was quite key to be able to get people to think about nature and embed it into the development process. And from that, developed a business case as well, where increasingly and a growing body of early adopters and sector leaders began to see actually for their projects, for their sector, there was real opportunities in being seen to implement this, not just from a kind of a PR perspective, but also it could save them money and save them time as well. If they got this right from the outset, it saved them a lot of energy and effort further down the line. So there's real opportunities to develop a business case and identify kind of potential win-win opportunities. And so over a period of about almost 10 years, we've seen a kind of growing body of work that's began with voluntary and is now ending up with an Environment Act that's just been passed that is going to be mandating biodiversity net gain. And with that, we've seen a kind of corresponding increase in the kind of market, the amount of money that we're able to leverage through the private sector to invest in the natural environment as well. That was fairly steady and fairly low for a number of years, but we're really beginning to see that escalate now as projects are beginning to move towards a situation where they legally, as Claudia said, are going to have to deliver this. And that's unlocking lots of potential to invest in the natural environment. So a lot of work has gone on to this. It hasn't happened overnight, but it did lead to the Environment Act and its requirements for a mandatory biodiversity net gain, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail now. But before doing that, it also led to some other work on kind of wider policy as well. So what was also working was developing and implementing biodiversity net gain into our national planning policy framework, embedding it in national planning guidance, national design codes and design principles, and also our national infrastructure strategy. So alongside this voluntary work, you began to see a growing kind of policy drive towards taking forward biodiversity net gain and expecting at a kind of plan level, so for local authorities and also individual sectors to begin to think about this and begin to embed it into their practice. But what's really going to change the future is the recently passed Environment Act rather. And this now includes a legal requirement that essentially all development projects in England, so that's housing, infrastructure, will have to in the future implement a biodiversity net gain approach. It requires these projects to deliver a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain. That can be increased locally if the local planners require that, and all measured using a standardised biodiversity metric. And I'll talk about that metric in a little bit. Those biodiversity outcomes need to be monitored and legally secured for at least 30 years. So this is a long-term requirement as well. This isn't a kind of quick, here's some money and then no one sort of follows it through. This is a long-term expectation that this will lead to a real change in how habitats get managed in England. Obviously, this is still quite new for many organisations. So there is a 2-year transition period before this becomes a legal requirement. So the Act has just passed. It passed a couple of weeks ago. And so this will become a legal requirement for all development projects in England in it's technically late 2023. And what's really important to stress is this is additional. This isn't changing or replacing any existing legal protections. They still exist. This is adding to those as well. So this is a new requirement on top of existing kind of legal protections. And there's basically 3 ways in which it's expected that net gain will get delivered. And the first and probably the most significant and the way that most net gain will in practice be delivered is within the development site. And that's through better quality green infrastructure, through high quality landscaping, and that's provides real opportunities then to integrate nature into the development in a way that ensures that those who are living or kind of working near that development site can also have opportunities to benefit from that. So real opportunities to contribute towards kind of placemaking and improving the kind of built environment. And that's irrespective of the area of a city or an urban area, rich and poor areas. There's real opportunities to benefit from that. Where that's not possible, though, and there will be instances where that's not possible, then a developer can instead purchase what are described as biodiverse units from other landowners to make good the kind of shortfall they have to achieve this 10% gain. So this will be through people such as environmental charities, planning authorities who have their own land, farmers, etc. And they'll be able to, and the projects will be encouraged to do this locally. So rather than kind of purchasing units at the other end of the country, to purchase quite close to where the development is. So again, there's an opportunity for the local community to benefit from them. There is an option of last resort, which is the least preferred, and that is in extreme circumstances where for some reason a project can't deliver net gain on their site and there's no kind of market opportunity available locally, in which case they will be able to purchase statutory credits from government, and that will be invested into strategic habitat creation schemes. But that really is a last resort. The emphasis is very much on deliver on site or deliver locally where possible through a market. And I mentioned about a metric, and this is a really fundamental part of the policy. It's not the only part of the policy, but it is quite a critical part. But because it's the mechanism for calculating the baseline. So what was the value of the development site before any development took place? And then what would be the likely impact of that development on nature and what's needed to deliver in order to achieve this biodiversity net gain? So it's a tool that should provide confidence. It needs to be kind of robust and evidence-based so that you've got that consistency there. It's also something that all projects will be using. So it's, it needs to be applied consistently by different projects. But it also needs to be simple so that planners, as well as ecologists and the local community and developers can engage with it and understand it. So it's a tool that Natural England with other organisations has been working on. And we released the kind of most recent version of this tool in July of this year. And it uses habitats as a proxy measure for wider biodiversity. So you won't see information about individual species in there. It includes habitats, but it includes all habitat types that you're likely to find in the United Kingdom. So that's everything from a street tree, a green roof, a kind of a sustainable drainage scheme, all the way through to rivers, woodlands, chalk grasslands, excuse me, and also some of the coastal habitats as well. So it covers intertidal as well as terrestrial habitats. And it uses a relatively simple and straightforward calculation that's based on the kind of size of the habitat, the condition of the habitat, how distinctive that habitat is, so what importance is that habitat have, and where is it located? So is it in an area that locally has been identified as being important for nature in a local plan? And it also allows for the import of GIS data into it. And we're looking at creating a kind of an online version of this metric as well. And it's intended to work in a kind of wide range of applications. So from kind of small urban interventions, such as urban kind of SUD schemes, big new housing developments, major infrastructure projects, and at the coast. It's also the metric that anyone that owns land will be using to kind of measure the value of what they've got and how they can create additional nature for developers to potentially engage in that market that I was talking about before. So it is an important component of the whole approach. So what's happened at the moment is we're as a consequence of, firstly, the work that was done, as I said, in partnership with the professions, with developers, with planners and others, then the kind of emerging kind of policy, and now with the Act that's coming into force in the future, we're really beginning to see a significant change in the approach to how people think about nature and how people think about biodiversity in England. You'll hear a bit more about that when hearing about Greater Manchester. More and more developments are now committing themselves to biodiversity net gain, and that's both in urban areas and in rural areas. The metric is now in kind of widespread use, and there's interest in it across the UK and also outside. We are seeing biodiversity net gain incorporated into more and more policies and guidance from government. And more organisations are beginning now to set up habitat banks and opportunities to create new habitats to enter into this market, both environmental organisations, but also private capital is coming in now as well. So we're seeing investment by kind of asset managers, kind of boutique equity funds wanting to invest in the natural environment. And that's quite unique. We haven't seen that really before. There's also more work happening on kind of developing standards. So I mentioned about the British standard, BS 8683, that was published in September. It sets out the kind of best practice approach for biodiversity net gain. And it's unique, it's a first in the world as well. So we're quite proud that that's now out there. And there's work looking at potentially developing that as an international standard. And there's also work about potentially extending this whole approach to the marine environment. So at the moment, it's all focused terrestrially, but there is work underway looking at its potential to extend it to the marine environment. But this hasn't been without challenges, and there are still challenges. So there is and these are in a number of areas. So firstly, there's a real challenge around skills and the resources, particularly in local planning authorities, and that's recognised. There is a need for additional resource going into local planning authorities so they can adapt to this and kind of make the most of these new opportunities. There's also a need to upskill ecologists as a profession. They've been quite used to working quite different ways, so there is a challenge for the profession there to kind of change how they approach. There's a whole series of systems and processes that need to be developed and designed for this mandatory net gain system to work, such as having a national register, the metric that I talked about. The emphasis is very much on delivery on-site, and we need to make sure that on-site delivery is robust. It's done to a really good standard, and it's maintained and managed in the same way that off-site delivery is as well. And there's more work to do there. And then we also need to make sure that these habitats that are created are genuinely being managed for the long term, and that monitoring is undertaken on those as well. And there is work underway to ensure that, but it's critical we get that right. We need to make sure this is a genuine change. It doesn't just result in kind of numbers on a spreadsheet. But as I said, I'm going back to kind of the Lego that I started with, there are real opportunities, I think, with this as well. there's real opportunities to leverage long-term investment in nature recovery. Kind of 30+ years of money is coming into the natural environment. We have more people experiencing nature where they're close to where they live and work. Opportunities for communities, rich or poor, to have contact with nature and the benefits that we know they can derive from that in terms of health and well-being. It can also contribute to both the nature emergency, but also the climate emergency in terms of creating habitats that can provide nature-based solutions, and it can restore and create ecological networks and as I said, contribute towards these nature-based solutions. So I think to conclude, there is a real opportunity here through this approach, and hopefully you'll hear more about some of the kind of fantastic work that's now happening in Greater Manchester. But thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Nick. This was absolutely great, and I would like to highlight that more documents, videos, and natural England materials are available on the website for everybody who could be interested in learning more about this approach. Please let me have a look at the chat box to see if is there any question for Nick from the audience. So please, whoever would like to ask a question or to ask for more information on this biodiversity net gain UK approach, as well as the metrics which relates to it, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will ask Nick to reply for you. If there are no questions at this stage, I would like to invite Krista Patrick from the Greater Manchester Authority. I would like to give a bit of context. The Greater Manchester Authority is a regional city which comprises of different cities, including Manchester, but the Greater Manchester does not overlap only with Manchester. So it's the correspondent authority to città metropolitana. This would be the equivalent in Italy. So it's my pleasure to leave the room to Krista Patrick, who is the Natural Capital Coordinator of the Greater Manchester Environment Team. Thank you very much, Krista. And in the meantime, should anyone be willing to ask questions even to Nick, please feel free to type them in the chat box. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. Just sharing my screen now. Let's come back to the start. Right, can you see that all? Is that okay, Claudia?
Yes, it's okay. Yes, we can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me this morning. And really, this is building on from Nick's presentation, just providing an example and a context of how the national requirements, and particularly through the Environment Act, are being delivered in Greater Manchester. And as Nick said, you know, the Environment Act requirements are coming in over the next 2 years. But from our perspective and our point, we want to, and this is with a number of authorities across the country, are looking to prepare now for biodiversity net gain. So not waiting for 2 years to actually get ourselves prepared. So actually planners, developers, local authorities are prepared and know what to expect and ask for in terms of biodiversity net gain in planning, and actually kind of looking to understand what we're looking for in terms of planning applications and the type of information we're looking to require. So before I start with my slides, I think it's worth just kind of mentioning that we were an early tester of natural capital approaches, so just wider from biodiversity again, but looking at wider ecosystem services. And being an early tester of natural capital and how we deliver natural capital approaches and biodiversity net gain has really helped to test our approaches for delivery of biodiversity net gain. And so in the next kind of 15-20 minutes, I'm going to provide an overview of the ability really to measure nature and what it means for Greater Manchester. So the first thing is really just to say that actually my role as Natural Capital Coordinator is funded through an EU Life project called Natural Course, which is a 10-year project, 20 million euros, looking at how we deliver improvements to our water quality, reduce flood risk, and enhance biodiversity through a more joined up integrated water management approach. And through that, looking at how we, kind of deliver natural capital and catchment-based approaches. So a lot of this is to do with how we deliver and meet the Water Framework Directive requirements around good ecological status. And so a lot of that is to do with how we actually improve our rivers in Greater Manchester. A lot of them have been heavily modified because of the Industrial Revolution, but also a lot of pollution. And so what we are trying to do is look at how we can identify and understand innovative and cost-effective solutions for a range of water management issues, and where possible using natural capital approaches to help deliver kind of multiple benefits from those approaches. And I suppose many of the challenges that we face from or around improving our water quality, reduce flood risk and enhance biodiversity are considered as shared problems. They all affect each other and they require shared solutions. So they're not all considered in isolation or one or the other, they're considered together. And I think this works much better if all different partners and different stakeholders come together and work together to come up with and realise the solutions and actually produce mechanisms, financial instruments and other types of solutions that can help deliver. And I think biodiversity net gain is a really good example of how we can work together on that and achieve those objectives. So I mentioned the kind of natural capital word and the work that we've been doing around natural capital. So I just want to kind of just very, very quickly just provide a bit of an explanation on this slide in terms of what we mean by natural capital. So some of you may be familiar with natural capital, some of you may not, but I think through our work on natural capital, I think it's clear to see the relationship between biodiversity and wider ecosystem services benefits. So, whether that's carbon, whether that's flood risk, or whether that's recreation and health benefits, delivering biodiversity net gain not only enhances biodiversity, but fundamentally underpins all the benefits that we receive from that. So it provides benefits in terms of all of our stocks of natural capital and underpins our natural capital, our assets, our water, our land, our air, our biodiversity. It all underpins that. And if we don't manage our biodiversity, then effectively that, kind of directly affects our natural assets. So we've already got a lot of data, tools and evidence to actually understand what we currently have in Greater Manchester in terms of our natural capital assets and the benefits they provide, but as well as their value and can monitor these natural assets over time and where possible seek their improvement. And this provides decision makers at all levels with the tools and evidence to make more informed and joined up decisions. But we still don't have all detailed information. We don't have all the complete picture of the condition of our habitats. And so the metric, the DEFRA that Nick referred to, is a really, really useful tool to understand, and actually influence planning applications from a kind of, achieving a no net loss to actually starting to deliver actual net gain and nature positive outcomes. And I suppose the principles of the metric that Nick mentioned can also be used to inform the next stage of our journey, which is around achieving environmental net gain and including kind of all the tools and evidence that we've developed. And this we've been on a natural capital journey for a number of years now, and the approaches that we've been delivering don't happen overnight, and this takes time to evolve. And a lot of this, in terms of people understanding the wider benefits from our natural environment, that happens in terms of building political and stakeholder support. So we have a natural capital group, which is our local nature partnership, which is the ambassador for Greater Manchester natural environment, and we have representatives from the private sector, from the public sector, and from the third sector, so from the community and voluntary sector, as well as the research, so the universities that sit on our natural capital board and help to influence how we are delivering things. And as I mentioned before, we have a lot of information that we've built on, so we've used that information to engage with a range of stakeholders, including our politicians and our mayor, around ensuring that actually the natural environment is a key priority for Greater Manchester, but also then kind of looking at how we can build that to actually look at producing kind of natural capital investment plans, and actually looking to kind of build that and actually design delivery models in terms of actually kind of looking at where we can get investment and generate investment into our natural environment, because a lot of the public funding, historically we've focused on public funding to improve and manage our natural environment, but we need to be starting to look at blending the public with the private finance, because the private sector also benefit from the natural capital benefits that are being delivered for our natural environment. So we need to look at innovative ways of creating finance and actually looking to get that finance to actually help improve our natural environments. So as I mentioned, we've been delivering this natural capital approach. We were one of 4 areas in the country that were testing the natural capital approaches through the government's 25-year environment plan. And so over the past 4 years, we've been looking at how we deliver a range of pilots and test projects to actually test how we deliver natural capital approaches. So that could be around producing the evidence base, and I'll come on to that in a minute, about how we actually understand our natural environment. But also second there is actually how do we deliver biodiversity net gain approach to leave biodiversity in a better state than before, but also how do we create a natural capital investment plan that brings in existing and new sources of funding in Greater Manchester to help protect, manage and improve our natural environment, but also looking at demonstrator projects around how we can use nature-based solutions like green roofs, green walls, to actually capture a lot of the water that would normally go into our stormwater drainage. Actually, how can we kind of develop those nature-based solutions on site, so that actually that water that's normally going into our wastewater system actually is captured on site, and actually that can be used as a financial model to actually reduce costs for those places like schools. But also I think developing communication and engaging with people is absolutely important, so that people actually, our communities, our residents, actually understand the true value of our natural environment, and that will help in terms of delivery of biodiversity net gain. That if more people understand the value that our natural environment provides and the benefits that they're receiving, then there's a shift change in terms of how people actually look at our biodiversity and our natural environment, and they too get involved, volunteer, help protect, but also just respect our natural environment. So I mentioned about the natural capital work that we've been doing and the evidence, and this is an example of the natural capital accounts that we've produced for Greater Manchester, and this was a key priority at the start of our journey. was the development of a set of natural capital accounts to actually kind of measure the benefits provided to the city region in terms of its natural assets, to its businesses, to the public, and to all those that, you know, kind of call Greater Manchester home. And we've done this so that we know what we currently have and we can monitor that over time, seeking improvement. So, you know, this provides decision makers with the tools and evidence to make those informed decisions. And it's presented in a way that the benefits can be communicated to a number of different audiences in a language that they understand. So on this this slide here, we've got on the left-hand side, we've got the benefits that our natural environment on an annual basis. So each year, our natural environment creates £372 million worth of revenue in terms of people visiting our parks, our kind of green spaces. So this is money that they spend in local cafes, local restaurants, paying for parking. This is the benefits that receives from people going out and enjoying their green spaces. But the second one to that is health, mental health benefits. There are £264 million worth of mental health benefits that our Greater Manchester residents receive each year from our natural environment. And we know that there's a lot of evidence out there about how people benefit from our natural environment in terms of their mental health. And we can calculate that, but we can then communicate that in a way to our colleagues, like those working in the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership. We can say, actually, in terms of our natural environment, that's preventing, you know, people being able to go outside, being able to walk in green spaces. And we know that through COVID, that is really, really important, that actually we're preventing, on average, 372 hospital admissions, you know, and avoiding 1,200 years lost in terms of our residents. Now, that has an impact on our, you know, on our social care system, on our hospitals. And if we can, you know, avoid people becoming ill and going into hospital by providing access to green space and making sure they've got green spaces, then that's a saving to society. And a lot of this is actually, you know, actually, if we don't look after our green spaces, our natural environment, this is the cost to society. This is what we lose because we're not managing and protecting those green spaces. So it's a really important piece of information, really, that we can use to communicate with key decision makers, officers, politicians on the importance of our natural environment and why we need to protect, manage and improve our natural environment, because if we don't, then there's a cost to society. And our annual benefit from our natural environment is £1 billion per year. So there's a really, you know, important message there. And I mentioned before around our journey and the policies that we've been producing in Greater Manchester. And we have, you know, kind of overarching policies. We have the 5-year GM environment plan, which sets out a key ambition to protect, maintain and enhance our natural environment and to achieve environmental net gain. So environmental net gain is the next step from biodiversity net gain, and that's a key outcome for the 5-year environment plan for Greater Manchester, but also the 25-year environment plan for the country. And there's a step change of looking to deliver biodiversity net gain, and then on the journey going to achieve environmental net gain. And within our infrastructure plan, our Places for Everyone plan, that sets out where our next houses and offices are going to be built. We have a policy in there that is looking to achieve a measurable net gain of no less than 10%. So again, that's including the biodiversity net gain requirement of 10%, which reflects the Environment Act and the national requirements there. And that's something that's quite important really for us, because actually this plan will be, you know, coming ahead of the Environment Act, and therefore we can start to require, once this plan has been approved, we can start requiring developers to actually provide 10% net gain, biodiversity net gain on their planning applications coming forward. So that's a real, you know, really important step. And obviously we have 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester, and they also have their own plans. which will then follow on from our overall infrastructure plan at a later date. But it's important to state that we have that policy in our infrastructure plan for Greater Manchester, and when that becomes adopted next year, you know, we will then be able to start requiring developers. But we are starting to see developers already coming forward with biodiversity net gain in their planning applications. And another piece of policy that we have is we were one of 5 pilots in the country testing the delivery of a local nature recovery strategy. So the local nature recovery strategy has recently been published as a pilot. We will be looking to actually produce a formal, more statutory local nature recovery strategy over the next year, and that's the same across the country, that authorities across the country will have to start producing a local nature recovery strategy as a result of the passing of the Environment Act. And working in terms of being one of the 5 pilots in the country, the local nature recovery strategy sets out the priorities and opportunities across Greater Manchester to tackle biodiversity and the biodiversity emergency, and look to enhance the natural environment, so both for nature but also wider benefits to our environment, but also importantly, as Nick mentioned, our economy and our society too. And it sets out the places, the areas where we can prioritise where we should be improving our nature, but also the practical actions to deliver on this. So where should we be planting more trees? Where should we be improving our grasslands? Where should we be having more wildflower meadows? Where should we be putting in or enhancing our wetland habitats? So to be more resilient to climate change, Greater Manchester's ecological network needs to be bigger, better, and more joined up. And the local nature recovery strategy provides another piece of evidence of what we have, and together with the DEFRA metric can help to further understand and reconcile and balance the kind of pressures that we have for land in our areas, and how we can protect, manage and enhance our natural environment. And it's important also to mention that this shows a picture here of the 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester, that we have a shared service across Greater Manchester called the Greater Manchester Ecological Unit, and that includes 6 ecologists and 3 other officers that act as our special advisors to our planning authorities on ecology issues and planning applications, and they provide an important resource for us. And you know, they advise on approximately 1,000 new planning applications per year, 30% of which are major planning applications, so major large-scale housing or office and commercial developments. And so they've been over the past kind of 18 months been applying the net gain tool and testing that through the metric to actually see how that's being applied in practice. And we've got a number of case studies on our website, and I've got some links at the end of the slide in terms of those case studies and a lot of other resources that we've been doing. So it's actually kind of they provide an important resource. So each of the authority pay an agreed amount each year for the ecology to provide that service, and that provides a very, very important service to us in terms of having very specialist ecologists that can look at the ecological assessments, and in future the biodiversity net gain assessments that are coming through to accompany planning applications as a result of the biodiversity net gain requirements. And they assess those applications and those assessments to make sure that they cover everything that they should be, and actually to ensure that they can be signed off, but also, if not, what are the issues that they're not covering, or that where improvements can be delivered on site that aren't covered in their current planning application, their assessment using the DEFRA metrics. So very, very important resource for us. And the biodiversity net gain requirement places an additional kind of resource requirement on them. They currently only have funding at the moment to cover ecological assessments. So again, one of the key things coming from the Environment Act is how we look to provide additional resourcing for our local authorities through what's called additional burdens to actually cover those additional costs for actually reviewing biodiversity net gain assessments that will be coming with planning applications. And I mentioned support. There's lots of other support that we've been producing for Greater Manchester in advance of the mandatory requirement for biodiversity net gain that will be coming in 2 years' time. So we've been working with all our 10 planning authorities to better understand what this means for them, but also the opportunities that this can bring, so that we have a plan and a head start before this comes into force over the next few years. So we've been looking at developing guidance on the right for local authorities as to how they should be looking at planning applications and what kind of discussions they should be having with local developers in terms of applying biodiversity net gain, and clarifying the requirements at a national level in terms of applying that to what this means locally on the ground. And to do that, we've also been kind of producing flow diagrams here. So the flow diagram on the left shows the different people involved in the process, whether that's developers, local planning authorities, or our ecology unit, and their role in the process. So it's not entirely straightforward. There's lots of different roles here and people in terms of developers, you know, putting together a proposal and using the deferometric and applying the mitigation hierarchy, and actually then kind of putting that to the local planning authority to check, and the local planning authority gets advice from the ecology unit on whether or not that should be approved or not, or whether or not that needs to go back and needs to be kind of looked at further improvements. So all of this, there's a process involved here, and the guidance that we've produced helps to kind of understand that process, and we've produced a number of case studies on how the deferometric's been produced. And, you know, from our point of view, you know, there's still more to be done, but this provides a really good, you know, kind of starting point to understand the process. But also, there, as Nick's mentioned, there are, you know, and the starting point for biodiversity net gain is to deliver on site, and that developers should consider as you know, as much as they can, that they deliver that on site in terms of the loss of the units, but also in terms of the gains there. But there are going to be certain instances where developers can't provide on site, or actually it might be better to put the gain into another site, and therefore there's a number of options that, you know, we need to consider, and I know that Nick's run through those, and we've kind of looked to understand how those options, whether or not that's a developer, you know, provides a net gain on their own land, or they buy a net gain from another landowner, or they pay money to the local authority to actually find a site for them, or they pay into a kind of a wider habitat banking scheme, or actually kind of buy it from a broker, or actually buy it from a national pot of statutory biodiversity credits. So there's a range of options there that developers can look at if they can't provide on site, and they can demonstrate good reasons why they can't provide on site, and actually, you know, they need to look for off-site opportunities. So we've again provided this flow chart to understand how that process works, and again we're testing this all the time in terms of, you know, it's a very kind of fast-moving, evolving process. So there's a lot of work that we're doing to understand that. So we've commissioned some work recently to set out a more detailed action plan as to what we need to do to actually help deliver off-sites and kind of receptor sites, to actually help developers kind of you know, kind of off-site, you know, find those offsets. So part of what I mentioned before is around, you know, looking at financing and actual kind of innovative financing, and this is a key thing really from our point of view, is looking how we set up innovative financing to actually help fund our future natural environment projects, and improvements on the ground, and that includes also, you know, kind of biodiversity net gain. And we've recently set up the Greater Manchester Environment Fund, which is looking to channel more funding and investment into the natural environment in Greater Manchester. And this has already invested around £2 million into projects across Greater Manchester, predominantly through grant funding, public funding, that will improve nature and restore over 500 hectares of habitats across Greater Manchester. But we're looking at ways we can attract further investment into Greater Manchester, particularly for organisations that are wanting to perhaps address their negative environmental impacts. So that could be corporate organisations that want to offset their carbon emissions. And actually, how do we kind of look at producing some innovative financing for investors to invest in, to get a return back on that investment, that money can go into large-scale environmental projects. So there's a lot of work we're doing on this at the moment. And one of those things is around biodiversity net gain. So at the moment, we've been funded as a pilot from the government's Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund to actually test setting up a large-scale habitat bank in Salford, in the city of Salford, on an area that is peatland, wetland, and actually look at how we potentially could develop and get upfront funding. You know, we're talking around £2 million to actually invest in a site that can improve that site, not only in terms of its biodiversity, but also in terms of its carbon. We have, you know, a large-scale area that currently is degraded peatland and is emitting a lot of carbon emissions. And what we want to do is improve that wetland so that we lock the carbon emissions into that site, but also it starts kind of positively absorbing carbon as well from the atmosphere. So we're looking to develop this site. We need approximately, you know, £2 million to actually of funds to carry out the works on those sites to improve that site. And what we're doing here is setting up a new way of funding that through biodiversity net gain, and actually looking at where we can produce a business case for, you know, big investors to lend the £2 million to us, and then we actually repay that back to them over time through selling biodiversity units to developers that want to buy those units for their planning applications. So rather than the developers finding their own sites, we have a large-scale site that can sell them the biodiversity units if they can't find those units on site. So it's a very new, innovative way of financing. But what we want to do is test this on this site and then actually scale that up across Greater Manchester and find more habitat banks across Greater Manchester that can actually deliver large-scale off-site solutions. So very, very innovative, but it's about joining up the opportunities. So actually, in terms of actually getting investors to invest in these sites, you need large-scale investment opportunities. And that's, again, our Ignition project that we have is based at a number of partners, including Salford University, where Claudia is based. And what we're doing through the Ignition project is actually looking at how we can deliver nature-based solutions. So that's green rural, green roofs, green walls, swales, rain gardens, and actually look at how we can fund those and scale that up across Greater Manchester. So there's a living laboratory at the University of Salford where they put in green roof, a green wall and a rain garden, and they're testing that. They have connected to a number of sensors, and they're testing the effectiveness of those nature-based solutions in terms of kind of slowing the flow in terms of water, reusing that water, but also in terms of the biodiversity, and looking at how those kind of, how those measures provide increased biodiversity for those buildings, but also additional wider benefits like cooling for the building. And when you understand those wider benefits, you can start building the business case to actually say to other developers that want to scale this up across Greater Manchester, there's a business case here, there's a saving for you in terms of your water bills, but also in terms of your heating bills, and also generally in terms of your health and well-being of your workers, but also in terms of attracting people to the area. There's a real good financial case, and so Ignition has been looking at developing the business case for those, embedding those nature-based solutions in new developments, and actually how you can scale that across Greater Manchester. So there's some really good work being delivered there. And finally, really, I think my final point here is that we've achieved a lot over, and it's particularly during COVID, in terms of this agenda, and it's a really exciting time to be working on this, and we'll continue to drive forward this agenda. And to do that, there are a number of key commitments, and our Mayor Andy Burnham has made nature a part of his priorities, and this includes publishing the local nature recovery strategy that we've developed, and looking now to kind of take forward a more formal statutory local nature recovery strategy, setting up a green spaces fund through the Greater Manchester Environment Fund to help communities clean up and improve their green spaces, and actually provide new pocket parks. And that's a really important fund that, on the back of COVID, will help to provide improved and new green spaces in the areas that need them most. I think we've seen through COVID, particularly in terms of inequalities, where people haven't got access to green space that really do need it the most, and therefore the Green Spaces Fund will help to address that. But also actually signing up to the Edinburgh Biodiversity Declaration, and that's something that we're looking at delivering at the moment, as well as appointing a natural environment champion. And again, that champion being able to engage with the public, and particularly around the Green Spaces Fund, and helping to promote the natural environment in Greater Manchester. So for myself, I've said that I'll provide some links. So if you need more information on what we're doing, there's a number of key links here that you can refer to, particularly the biodiversity net gain guidance and all the resources that we've got that you can have a look there. But there's some really useful stuff on there. Check it out, and if you've got any questions, then let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Krista. This was just great. And I think that also some questions have been typed in the chat box. Possibly both presentations obviously raised some interesting questions. So the first question is about the mandatory and the regulatory value of DIFRA metric. I think that Nick has replied in the chat box. I just wonder whether it would be useful to expand on the mandatory requirement of using a DIFRA metric as a tool for the assessment, and whether other tools can be used alternatively. Would the DIFRA metric be the mandatory tool for the assessment of biodiversity?
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. It's a good question as well. So one of the drivers of making the tools use mandatory is, at the moment, there are different metrics in existence, and so each one measures things subtly differently, and so developers and planning authorities are kind of finding it quite difficult to compare between metrics as well. So people would try and sort of use one that they felt might be more beneficial. So the bill will require that everyone uses the same metric, essentially, so that projects can baseline themselves and kind of benchmark themselves against others to see what they're doing. You have that kind of greater level of consistency. There will be, at a local level, still an opportunity to increase the amount of the net gain requirement that people want to set. So Krista mentioned Greater Manchester is looking currently at 10%. Some other planning authorities are looking to go beyond that and say, actually, no, we're going to ask for 20%. But yeah, there will be, in the future, everyone will be using the kind of same metric for consistency.
Thank you very much. Just a curiosity, Krista, do you feel that developers around the Greater Manchester area, which is quite a growing urban area at the moment, have well accepted, well received this kind of extra requirement?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we are starting to see biodiversity net gain coming through in applications. It's not coming through in all applications, but I think we are starting to see that, developers that want to demonstrate, their benefits and actually kind of are, understanding and starting to embed biodiversity net gain with their planning applications, are looking to embed this. And I think, increasingly the work that we're doing is helping to support the planning authorities on this. So we've been delivering a lot of training for planning authorities. And I know that at a national level, Planning Advisory Service, DEFRA and Natural England have also been supporting planning authorities. And I think this is a key thing really, is supporting the planning authorities to know, what's coming, but also what to start looking for and what to require, but also developing their own policies. As Nick said, that if you start having the policies at the local level, then that can start requiring developers to actually start putting, that into and considering that as part of their planning applications. So until things are, mandatory, we can't enforce that. We can't require developers to embed biodiversity net gain. But I think what we're seeing is an experience from other authorities that already have policies that actually the process of assessing planning applications around biodiversity, a lot more, the actual issues and kind of discussions and issues that come back if you're already considering that in your planning applications, then and looking to provide positive solutions to that, then those planning applications are likely to have a lot less issues than actually if you're not addressing that at this moment. Albeit that we haven't got the Environment Act in terms of kind of statutory mandatory requirement of biodiversity net gain. The more the planners and developers are starting to think about this now, then things are starting to ramp up and they do need to start being kind of looking at this now, because it will be coming, and the more that they start doing this now, then that provides a positive kind of input to their planning applications.
Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting, this combination between regulatory framework, but also a kind of educational process, which is brought forward in parallel, and I would say in anticipation, because as Nick also mentioned, the work of Natural England started much earlier. And I'm just reading another very interesting question, which is, I try to summarize, what is about environmental policies following post-Brexit. So what will happen to the strategic environmental assessment? I translate for Italian planners and architects. We're talking about VAS, Valutazione Ambientale Strategica. So what's happened to the strategic environmental assessment and environmental impact assessment post-Brexit, and how does it relate possibly with the biodiversity discourse?
So they still exist. So they were carried over from European legislation and translated across into legislation for the UK. As was kind of as Ali mentioned in the chat, there is a planning bill. There are planning reforms planned for the UK, and there is potential that those regulations could change through that process. But at the moment, they're not. And it's intended that the biodiversity net gain requirement, as I was saying, it's additional to that. So it's on top of any existing kind of legislation. So both sort of legislation that's been carried across from Europe, or kind of historic legislation around the environment that was already sort of already in place in the UK around protected species and irreplaceable habitats and things like that. So it's all additional to that, for the biodiversity net gain requirement.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions in the chat box, I would like to give now the floor to Pete. Pete works for a very interesting organization, City of Trees, which delivers on the ground green recovery. So we are now shifting from policies and wider scale regulatory and suggested approaches into what happens to the ground, and I would say in the roots of the trees. So thank you very much, Pete, for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Claudia, and and thank you for inviting me along today. So I work for City of Trees, and what I wanted to talk about today was a quick overview of what City of Trees is, so its background, where we operate, how we're funded, our structure and what we do. And then I would like to talk through how we make sure that our planting projects actually benefit wildlife and don't cause damage to wildlife. Although we'll then go through one of our example projects where I hope it will show that we've done lots of good and varied work to benefit quite a lot of wildlife. And then I'll go into briefly how we can use spatial mapping to identify priority locations for new tree planting that will provide benefits to wildlife. And then lastly, I would just like to finish up with a summary of what City of Trees has achieved over the last 5 years. Okay, so where do we actually operate? Well, we operate across Greater Manchester, across the 10 districts. I think Krista has probably already explained that. It's a conurbation, a city region of 3 million people, and it covers an area of approximately 493 square miles, and it's the second most populated urban area in the UK. Prior to 2015, between 1991, we were actually called Red Rose Forest, and we only covered 6 of the 10 districts. So it was in 2015 that we became City of Trees. So briefly, these are our aims. We want to plant 3 million trees across Greater Manchester. So effectively 1 tree for every person in the city region, and that's in the next 5 years, so an ambitious target. It's not just about planting trees, we also need to improve our green spaces, and from our perspective, managing the existing woodlands that we have is incredibly important. And key to all of this is engaging communities in all of our work so that people will take ownership of what we deliver. So in terms of our team, we are probably the biggest team of any of the community forests in England. We're a team of 20. We have a director and a management team of 3, a woodland officer, an officer that focuses on spatial planning, so a GIS officer, finance officer, 2 comms or PR officers, 1 funding officer, an admin officer, 2 delivery coordinators and 8 project officers. So it's a big team. We've got lots of expertise, and that helps us to deliver a variety of projects right across Greater Manchester. In terms of our funding, the key thing here to stress is that we don't rely on one source of funding. That would be quite an unstable model. So our funding comes from quite a few different sources. We have support from central government. We have funding from the local authorities in Greater Manchester. We're still thankfully receiving funding from the European Union, which is a godsend. We also receive lottery funding, donations from the wider public, but also increasingly more importantly, we are receiving funding from the private sector. The private sector, I think, really understands the importance of what we're doing, and from their corporate images, it's important that they are seen to be supporting green projects, and in particular projects that has a carbon benefit to it. So in terms of what we do, you would probably expect as a community forest, trees are at the heart of everything. So yes, new woodlands, but we also plant hedgerows as well, orchards, street trees, trees in parklands, which is particularly important because many of those trees are now under threat from diseases such as ash dieback. Managing our woodlands, which is really important because we need to get the most out of them from a biodiversity perspective and an ecosystem services perspective. We do lots of planting projects in schools. It's really important that we engage young people because they are the ones that are hopefully going to get us out of this climate emergency mess that we're currently in. So we're looking to them to have the skills to make sure that we have the woodlands for the future. And also we deliver projects that have natural flood management benefits associated as well. So we are one of 12 community forests in England. We had 2 new forests established this year in the northeast, at the top end of England, and at the bottom end of England in Plymouth. So that's great that the community forests are expanding. The concept of community forest was developed in the late 1980s as a way of regenerating degraded treeless landscapes, especially in areas of social deprivation. So it was seen as a vehicle for improving areas and creating benefits for people. And this carries on till this day. We are very much focusing our projects in areas where tree canopy cover is low and social deprivation continues to be an issue. We are also part of an initiative called the Northern Forest. We are one of 5 organisations in this project, and the aim of that project is to plant 50 million trees across the north of England in a band stretching from Liverpool in the west to Hull in the east. And you can see that from this map here. And the project partners are community forests in Haywoods area in the east, White Rose Forest in Yorkshire, City of Trees in Greater Manchester, and then Mersey Forest in Mersey area and Cheshire East and Cheshire West. And the other partner in this project is the Woodland Trust. So it's a very, very big project, lots of work to do, but we're already delivering some great projects. So in terms of what's happening for woodland creation in Greater Manchester at the moment, we've been very fortunate that the government has a pot of funding called Nature for Climate. £640 million has been made available to restore 35,000 hectares of peatland, but also to plant 30,000 hectares of trees per year across the UK by 2025. So a huge target. It's going to take a lot of work, but we've been very lucky to benefit from that. And the community forest last year received from that pot of funding £12.1 million to deliver approximately 1.25 million trees. And I'm pleased to say that we've got further funding this year from that same pot of funding, and we'll be delivering around about 100,000 trees over 70 hectares. We've got lots of work to do. In England, the average tree canopy cover is 16%. In Greater Manchester, it is 15.7%. So we're slightly behind the national curve. But look at that. Look at the European Union. They're miles ahead of us, 38%. So we really need to get those spades out and plant more trees to give us a chance of catching up with our European neighbours. Now, what's important to say here is that when we're looking to plant more trees, we need to do it in appropriate locations. We need to do it in places that is going to add benefits, a range of benefits, and not least of all, biodiversity benefits. So we need to be careful that we're not planting woodlands in areas where there are already existing important habitats, And there is a regulatory process in place through the Forestry Commission in England to make sure that we check the locations properly to ensure that there aren't already existing designations or important habitats like sites of special scientific interest or special areas of conservation or national nature reserves. We have to go through all of those checks. There are mapping websites available for us to check that. We need to liaise with our local statutory consultees, so people like the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, and we also engage with the Wildlife Trust, and I know Mark Champion is as part of this conference today. And so it's really important that we do all those checks to make sure that we're not delivering projects where we're going to damage wildlife. So it's a very rigorous process, and I hope that will ensure that what we do adds to biodiversity and not takes away from it. This map here just shows you an example of the sorts of things that are available on the mapping websites to show where, you know, existing habitats exist. And in this instance, what you can see, the dark spaces, these are peatland areas, moorland areas that are associated with ground nesting birds such as curlew and golden plover. And so in instances where these habitats exist, where we can see them on the mapping layers, we will then be required to undertake habitat and bird surveys to make sure that those locations are appropriate for tree planting and they're not existing important habitat spaces for birds. So we've been operating as Red Rose Forest now since 1991. So we've been around for a long time. And as you can probably imagine, as a community forest, our initial focus was planting trees and woodlands in urban areas. Those sites, many of which are public parks owned by the local authorities or managed by the local authorities, have now been planted up. So we've pretty much getting to the point where we're running out of spaces in urban areas. So we now need to consider looking beyond the urban areas and into the areas surrounding the towns and cities. Farmland is becoming increasingly important for us. So what I wanted to do here is provide an example of a project that we have delivered over the last 4 or 5 years that is in the upland areas around Greater Manchester. And it's an example of natural flood management where we're using forestry and other habitat creation works to help manage water to reduce the risk of flooding to urban communities downstream of this location. And the location in question is Crompton Moor in Oldham, which is one of the 10 districts of Greater Manchester. And what I hope is that this case study will demonstrate that what we're doing is good for flood management, but it's also good for ecology as well. So one of the important projects that's been happening on Crompton Moor is Peatland Restoration. We've been working with a range of partners here to replant and re-wet the moorland to re-establish the peatland area. And that involves lots and lots of sphagnum moss planting schemes. And as you can see from the photograph, we've been using an interpretation board to explain to communities why it's really important that we do this work. And a crucial part of that interpretation was educating people about the value, but also how fragile the moorland is. Because some of you may be aware that we had some significant peatland fires about 4 years ago. So our interpretation board is telling people not to have barbecues or to throw away cigarettes on the moor because they are very vulnerable and can burn quite easily. So I'm sure Mark Champion will be able to tell you more, but our peatland bogs, upland and lowland peatland bogs, are very important for a range of plants, but also for birds, insects and amphibians. And so it's really important that those peatland habitats are restored to create those environments for those very important species. Crompton Moor was a a conifer plantation planted up in the 1970s for timber production, as many other locations were in the UK. Obviously very important for a domestic timber supply, but not necessarily the best form of woodland for biodiversity. So what we're now doing is working with Oldham Council and the local Friends of group to gradually replace some of those conifer trees with native broadleaf species, as they are much better for biodiversity, and also we'll be looking to put in shrubby species and understory species which are good for insects, birds and small mammals. We're also undertaking riparian planting, or planting adjacent to the watercourses as well. Good for flood management, but it's also good in this instance for creating foraging space for insects and birds. We're planting shrubby species here, so smaller tree varieties, on purpose, because this area is known as a hunting ground for long-eared owls and they like open space. So we're very careful not to plant trees everywhere. It's really important that they have that open area retained. So it's about sensitive woodland creation, making sure that we understand the importance of the ecology that already exists in that location. Now, we've also been installing leaky dams on Crompton Moor. So these leaky dams have been constructed in the watercourses on the moor, and we've used timber from the plantation that you can see behind the tractor in this image. And these leaky dams effectively doing the same job as beavers, although we wouldn't find beavers in this upland area, but they are creating a system where we can slow that water down to reduce the peak flow in the river downstream, where we have communities that have been at risk of flooding in the past. So it's a really important form of natural flood management. And as you can see here, that what it's done now is created wetland areas behind the leaky dams that we've installed. And these are really now good for a range of different wildlife species, in particular damselfly and dragonfly, but also birds as well. And this year, birds have been recorded breeding behind the dams. So we had stone chats, and we've had wrens, and we've had pine as well. But also we've had some unusual visitors that we don't normally get up on the moor, and that's the green woodpecker, because they've been up there because of the insects that have been found around the leaky dams. So it's a nice, I suppose, added benefit of that natural flood management work. So that was an example of one of the projects that we do or have done to provide benefits to people, but also to wildlife. So quickly, I'm just going to explain the principle of where do we need to plant more trees. In the past, this has been done quite randomly, but now we need to understand where there is a need specifically to target more tree planting. And with our 10 district partners, we produced the Greater Manchester Tree and Woodland Strategy. And part of that strategy was about identifying priority locations for new tree planting. So using Ordnance Survey mapping, we identified all areas of land where potentially we could plant a tree, but of course all those areas would need to be checked to make sure that they are appropriate, i.e. that we're not going to cause damage to existing wildlife or habitats. And of course we would also need the consents of the landowners. But the piece of work was to identify where we should prioritize. Now, those parcels of land were then combined with other data layers such as air quality, urban cooling, so locations that were vulnerable to urban heat island, where we had existing wildlife areas, and also areas where there was social deprivation, and also areas that were vulnerable to flooding and also poor water quality. So all these data layers were brought together, and that was then used to create what we call a multiple benefit heat map. So the red areas are where tree planting could address multiple needs, and hence those will become our priority locations for tree planting. And this information is hosted on the Greater Manchester Combined Authorities Mapping GM website, and you can visit that, and then you can get down to the very, very detailed level to actually see where the locations for planting are and what particular issues they might be addressing. In this instance, I'm just showing you a map of which is on that website at the very detailed level, showing Wythenshawe Park in Manchester. And you can see the slightly darker spaces, green spaces, are existing woodlands. And then you can see the lighter green spaces are those open spaces or green spaces that are between woodlands. So these represent opportunities for us to do some tree planting, to connect those woodlands, to create wildlife corridors, to encourage the movement of species from one compartment of woodland to another. So this is good for hopefully increasing those populations and encouraging species diversity. So this is a useful mapping tool if we want to find out where we can use woodland creation to create those stepping stones or those corridors for wildlife. So just briefly now, I wanted to summarize really what we've achieved in the last 5 years, just to show that hopefully we are having an impact. I think the key figure here probably is the amount of trees we planted. So we've now achieved a figure of over 500,000. I've already mentioned at the start of the presentation that we've around about another 100,000 trees going in this year. However, it's important to stress that this is what we're delivering, but also we're counting the figures of our partners. So it won't be just our 100,000 trees, it will be the planting of our partners, including people like the Wildlife Trusts and the local authorities and people like Groundwork and so on. So it's a collective target. So we hope that figure will go up a lot more this year. We're also, as you can see, planting street trees, and that's really important for urban areas, especially where tree canopy cover is low and green infrastructure is low. So woodland management as well is another key figure there. We've already brought back into management another 268 hectares, so that those now are very attractive spaces for local communities to use. Lots of other figures I could go into here, but I think probably we may be running out of time a little bit. So I just wanted to very quickly summarize that presentation. So first of all, we do have a long way to go to catch up with our European neighbours. So we need to, as I said, get our spades out and do a lot more work. Planting trees needs to be very much a process that focuses on what is existing in an area before we plant there. We don't want to damage the existing wildlife there. We're running out of spaces in urban areas, so we do then need to look to those, I suppose, semi-urban areas and peri-urban areas around the towns and cities. And those areas are beneficial because they can provide significant flood management benefits to those cities and towns downstream. And that's where we can also deliver natural flood management. So our leaky dams are really good. They provide those flood management benefits, but they're also good for wildlife. And we need to use spatial planning to make sure that we use our resources wisely so that we get the most out of our investment in terms of a whole range of ecosystem services, and of course, not least of all, creating places for wildlife and new wildlife corridors. So that was quite a whistle-stop tour. I could have spoken for hours, but I think obviously there's lots of other people that need to be speaking as well. So I hope that was a good introduction to what we do, and obviously be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. It's just great to see how much work you managed to put forward as an organization, and how much also grassroots support you made possible through your organization. 17,000 hours of volunteer job is an indicator of the great commitment of communities to support your work. Undoubtedly, I have seen a couple of questions in the chat box. One is about how do you manage to engage with the private funders? So what kind of financial support are you able to raise from private funders and partners? And what is your approach in greening urbanized areas? Don't know if we have a few extra minutes to expand on these questions.
For private sector, we have a funding officer whose job it is to approach businesses directly, and he's been very successful at that. We have some good partnerships established with the private sector. Developers are particularly becoming more involved in our work because they know that obviously biodiversity net gain is something that's really important, but some of the developers now want to go one step further. So they are supporting us, providing funding to deliver projects, but we're also finding that the private sector want to involve their staff as well, their employees in projects. So we get lots of volunteers. And also what's good is that they acknowledge that for us to run events involving their volunteers costs money. So they donate money to us to cover our time to supervise their volunteers. So that's very good. Our website carries lots of information encouraging the private sector to come forward to us. So we get loads and loads of inquiries. It's very interesting really, because COVID did make things go quieter, but now we're getting back to where we were before COVID, with more and more private sector organizations coming to us, wanting to work with us, wanting to provide us with funding. And in an urban context, that's really important. That's a good question. We want to plant more street trees. Krista has already mentioned the Ignition project, about how we look at innovative ways for getting private sector investment. And we do get donations from the private sector and from developers for planting more street trees in urban locations. So I think that's really important, because we do need to keep biodiversity in the town and city centres. Obviously trees is one way of doing it. It's not necessarily the most effective way of doing it, but it's part of a bigger plan for how we get more wildlife into the city and the towns. So it's really important. It's a good question. We do need to get more green infrastructure, more trees, more green roofs in the towns and cities. And that is also a big focus for us. And our spatial planning work has identified those locations in the towns and cities where we should be doing that.
Thank you very much, Peter. This was great because definitely policies, spatial plans still needs to be put on the ground, and most importantly, offsetting, as you were saying, should still be considered carefully with respect to the opportunity of having trees in the city center rather than outside the city center. So thank you for your time today, but also thank you for your great job to make Manchester a greener city. One of the messages in the chat highlighted how the post-industrial future of Manchester is becoming greener, and I would like to highlight how this is happening, because at the different levels there are so many people working at all levels of the decision-making process, but also on the ground. Thank you very much, Pete. And I would like to leave the floor to Mark Champion from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust, since I'm aware that there are quite a lot of connections between the work of a City of Trees and the work of the Lancashire Wildlife So if Mark, you could upload your slides for us, it would be a real pleasure to listen and to listen about how you are managing basically areas which were used for industrial purposes. So we are really now at the heart of the problem of renaturalizing post-industrial landscapes and the urban context, which is a very, very current topic. So we are all keen to listening from you, Mark, what lessons you can share with us. Thank you very much.
Hello. Looking at a specific project which we have carried out in Wigan, which we manage as part of the sort of wider Great Manchester Wetlands NIA, which stretches down to the mosslands that we heard being described earlier, and is a really big area. So this is just a small sample of our work to give an idea of the benefits and the cross benefits ecosystem services, and it was based on a chapter of a book that Philip, James and myself wrote. So it looks at the changing landscape of the post-mining areas of Wigan. So it's part of the Great Manchester Wetlands NIA, which includes special areas of conservation, SSSIs, and the whole area is 1,500 hectares, so it's really quite large. The Wigan area is a tenth of that, at 1,500 hectares of land, and that's the area that I manage as on a daily basis. And it was heavily modified by industrial processes, predominantly coal mining, but also iron and steel production, the cotton industry, and many associated sort of heavy industries. So the landscape was, in an audit in the late 1960s, the second most damaged landscape in the United Kingdom. In a recent audit, nearly 90% of the land is made land. It's all been damaged and then recreated post mining. So you can see it's a very post industrial. And these conservation works, because of the nature of the ground, have involved some pretty major earthworks. Over the last 20 years, we've moved in excess of 2 million tons of post-industrial spoil to create sort of rational levels within the landscape. When the landscape was tipped, it had many piles and heaps and was on multiple levels, not all of which make sense when you're trying to create a hydrodynamic functioning landscape. A lot of the basic work was done in the 1970s as part of a nationwide, UK-wide land reclamation program. So there was some basic restoration to make it safe at that stage. So this work has been looking really at detailing and resolving smaller scale issues. And we're looking at management that provides a range of ecosystem services. When I started 20 years ago in Wigan, 22 years ago, we were looking mainly at biodiversity as the outcome. But over that period, there's been a much wider appreciation of the ecosystem services that can be delivered by environmental and conservation programs. So we're looking at, as been described by some of the other speakers, such things as the mental health benefits, the recreation benefits, getting people out onto these landscapes, trying to control some of the antisocial behaviour that was going on so that the sites are much more valued by the local people. Flood defence is really key, has been managed again by our other speakers. So there's a whole range of these functions that this landscape can provide. So here we are in the 1970s, the restoration scheme of the landscape planted much of the colliery spoil with trees. It restored some of the grasslands, and it developed a matrix of wildlife habitats across the area that this paper looks at. And since 1999, in partnership with sort of Wigan Council and other partners, we've been managing much of this Wigan landscape. So in partnership with the council, we manage 1,500 hectares of urban green space for conservation and the community. And it's really well known for its extensive stands of tall fen and reed bed. There are areas of mossland and wet grassland and other sort of wetland habitats as well, and wet woodland, which is really important for a species of bird called the willow tit, of which the UK has an endemic subspecies that actually behaves differently to the ones in the rest of Europe, which tend to live in more montane conditions. Ours like lowland swamps, just to be different, I guess. So they are quite unique. And the Wigan area holds around about 10% of the whole of the UK population of this particular species. And one of the reasons is that these post-industrial sites have this sort of impeded drainage. The land drains have never really been replaced after the mining, and the nature of the soil doesn't lend itself to large-scale development by housing or industry again, because it's very friable, it's quite difficult to actually build on. So there's quite a lot of this conservation land available for these projects. About 60% of the Wigan Borough is green because of its post-industrial background. But this land has a range of types of dereliction. It's still got pit shafts. The old pre-1950s mining didn't require that all the pit shafts were accurately mapped. So you still find old ancient pit shafts. There are spoil heaps, and just about 60% of Wigan is probably affected by being a spoil heap of some sort. There are obviously the buildings that were built as part of the mining and the other industry, and some of these still exist on the sites, along with bits of equipment, metal, cables and things. And there are a terrific amount of subsidence on the surface of the land. If you look at a map of the Wigan Borough, there are lots and lots of lakes. It's a very wet lake landscape. In Wigan, these are called flashes because they developed quite quickly from the subsidence. And there are lots and lots, again, of holes in the ground where there was open cast mining. And this is all these have had to be re-landscaped into nice, better quality habitats and landscapes. So again, lots and lots of dereliction based around the open cast mining in areas of Wigan. And the industry left large, so like iron and steel industry, left large amounts of post-industrial spoils, large patches of lime-rich material, or fly ash type products, all of which have an interesting now botany and give us interesting conservation habitats to restore from. The housing is still in many areas being now redeveloped because it doesn't fit the needs of the current population. And obviously there are the old railways stretching across the landscape, but these are really useful. Not only are they the derelict, but they're now able to be restored to provide cross-cutting corridors for species and people to use to move between green spaces or to commute. So there's some really nice opportunities along the old railway lines and the canals for this sort of open recreational and conservation use. And again, we've got materials that were tipped as part of illegal dumping, or indeed we have a few landfill sites as well that we are bringing into conservation management. So there we have an area that's well known called Bickershaw, and this is the case study that I'm going to show you, which you can see was very, very damaged by illegal off-road use, both Jeeps, Land Rovers, quad bikes, motorbikes. It was really the recreation area for this illegal type of activity, and at nearly 350 hectares, it was a really big blight in the middle of Wigan, and it wasn't serving any real functions. People didn't want to go to visit it because it was dangerous. There was this sort of illegal activity going on, and on the back of that illegal activity, there were other illegal activities. It was the centre of drug drops and all manner of other things. So it was really bad. And one of the other big problems was all the ruts caused by the four-wheel drives and things were making the site informally drained. So the water was going down these large ruts, taking with it the iron and the sulfuric acid from the pyrites, and taking it into the lakes and pools. And you can see that this was attracting like fly tipping and lots of bad antisocial behaviour. And I think those photographs show why the visitor numbers were so low and why this area was treated as quite a blighted area. And what restoration of land had occurred on the site was aimed at agriculture in the 1930s, in the 1970s, but it was never taken up because the soils weren't very good and the land wasn't very well drained. But where it was drained, the water was passing down trapezoidal channels and leaving the site really quickly. So it was all very problematic. So there we have one of the agricultural drains. Water falling in that location would go down this system. Much of the system was concrete lined so that the water went off the site as quickly as possible. You can see why the agriculture never took on the site. It was just too poor a grass growing on quite acidic soil. And the speed of the water passing down the 300 hectares meant that it was taking about half an hour to drain the site and leave the area. And there's 81 houses directly at the exit of this site, all of which are at risk of this water passing down this area and leaving the site. So this was obviously a site for natural flood management and habitat creation. We have 300 hectares potentially that we can use to improve the habitats on the site, get the invertebrates, the birds, the plants really able to use this site by making it sort of wetter, more biodiverse, but equally being able to store this enormous amount of water within the landscape and slow its passage through the drainage channels and the rivers in the Wigan area, reducing the flood risk. So that's what we've done. So we took the water out of the man-made regular channels that were put onto the farmland. We blocked off and recreated the correct topography where it's been damaged by the four-wheel drives and the motorbikes and so on. And we got money from the Environment Agency as part of the Natural Course and Slow the Flow projects. So they've been really, really important. And what we then did was re-meander the stream, and we built it so that it rejoined its floodplain. And when the water levels now come up, it can spill across the wider floodplain. It's got lots of pools along the system. It's got leaky dams and rock weirs and a whole range of habitats, allowing it to absorb the water within the landscape. So similar to the work by City of Trees. And when we had Storm Christoph, which really was serious, this site became in one sort of quite wet, lakey filled area that all the water was spilling out of the brooks across the habitats that we created. So they made it work, and the houses were not flooded. So it was really, really successful from that point of view. And you can see that when the nature has had its chance to recolonize the banks of the watercourses, it very quickly starts to green up. The rock weirs are starting to work. There's water being stored within the landscape and within the field soil matrix. So the site is storing lots and lots of water. We've included tree planting with, in our case, the partners of City of Trees, into that landscape, so that again the trees are helping to absorb the water coming in off the hills that are created by the post-industrial soil, and making the environment so much more green. And this has meant that things like there's an increased connectivity to fish. Great crested newts and are using the pool system. The site has got around about 3 kilometers of these meandered streams, replacing the concrete trapezoidal channel. So it's been done on quite a large scale over an area of around about 200 hectares. So it's really quite a large project, and we've done similar projects on other sites throughout Wigan. So there's a lot more of this sort of re-meandering, repooling, and this is allowing species to move through the landscape so much more effectively, and it's increasing the amount of people wanting to visit the sites. You can see that that landscape is so much better than the ones that we previously were looking at, with all the damage by the four-wheel drives and the motorbikes and so on, and that the fly tipping's gone. And we've gone from 10,000 visitors a year, most of which were there for interesting, dubious reasons, to nearly 60,000, 70,000 visitors just wanting to look at the countryside, walk the dogs, go for a jog in amongst this lovely landscape. And we've calculated that there's around about 1.2 million site visits to sites within Wigan by members of the public coming to enjoy that green landscape. They can see the sort of ecosystem services that this system is now creating. We've got mental health function, public exercise function, people meeting each other, as well as the flood defence and the biodiversity functions, people going out collecting blackberries. So we've got like the provisioning function food and so on. So the landscape is really, really starting to serve the people in the Wigan area as part of a wider landscape. You can see there the way the flood defence works operate, that when we get these high levels of rainfall that we're experiencing more and more, the water level is now stored within the wider landscape. And this has reduced the amount of antisocial behaviour significantly. We now spend what the equivalent of what the council and the local authority was spending on just removing fly tipping, on actual infrastructure improvements. We're now building paths, putting in bridges, making it so more and more people can enjoy the site, as opposed to it being this blighted area. So we've got better ecology with species being able to use the reed bed. So we've got the nationally scarce bittern booming from these reed beds. We've got water owls nesting. We've got water voles using the ditch systems. And again, this is bringing out people who want to go and bird watch and so on. So it's really amazing what the changes to the sort of peri-urban ex-mining landscape have brought to everybody's benefit. And the local crime rate has been reduced. We're not getting the wildfires. The fire brigade isn't out every weekend putting out wildfires. It's really, really successful in that in its reduction of antisocial and criminal behaviour, as well as providing environment benefits. Some of the other interesting things about it is that because of the really weird soils that have developed on the post-industrial spoils, so you can imagine what happens when the shale breaks down and it's got iron pyrites in, and this then flows over beds of lime that were also mined out of the coal mines. They're really quite weird, and they get some interesting vegetation types. So we've got these large areas of heathgrass sward. This is really unusual. If it was growing anywhere else in the UK, it would be an SAC type habitat, but because it's growing on post-industrial spoil, it hasn't been appreciated yet for just how amazingly unusual it is. We're still trying to persuade people just how amazing the conservation benefits can be on these peri-urban synanthropic sites. We've got a range of species living there, including dactylarrhiza orchids, and they've adapted to this strange landscape that's really full of these novel soil types, because they can hybridize, and the hybrids do well on these habitats, and we're in the zone of hybridization between the northern and southern marsh orchids. We're one of the few places in the entire world where this occurs. But one of the things that also drives it is this novel soil, and the fact that these orchids are pre-adapted, bringing the strengths of both southern and northern marsh orchid genetically to colonize these novel soils. So it's really quite an important conservation process beyond just the urban. The urban gives it some really interesting side issues and drivers, but the post-industrial nature plus its location is actually driving some really interesting, unusual and unique conservation situations. And it's so much so that Natural England is looking at designating the whole area a national nature reserve, because of its interaction with people and these interactions between the plants and the species and the post-industrial spoils. So there are opportunities beyond the obvious sort of conservation ones, where the functioning landscape is really important for people with 310,000 people living in Wigan Borough. There's 6 million people living in Greater Manchester and Merseyside. So you can see the site is really important for a range of activities. And this is the ladies' breast care dragon boat. So these are ladies that have all once had breast cancer, and they're using the site for paddling because it's really good for their health, their lymphedema and other illnesses that are as byproducts of having once had breast cancer. So that's their mental health, their cardio health. It's really, really important for this group and many other groups that are similar. So a big range of health benefits, and the size of the area allows activities to be zoned so that the dragon boat ladies aren't disturbing the wildlife. The wildlife people aren't in the way of the activity. So it's really good that we've got that size that allows us to carry out conservation and public engagement. So there's right. So the levels of engagement there. We did some research into the levels of engagement, looking at the ages and what they were doing. Are they intentionally coming to the flashes and the wetlands of Wigan to carry out a activity, or is it incidental? Are they using the site for commuting? So we've looked at all these. You can see there are big numbers of people wanting to use the Wigan flashes, and there are some of the activities, and we've explored how many people want to use the site for walking, how many people came for fresh air, how many people have come to look at the wildlife, and it's a really good mix of people wanting to use the sites for their different activities. So you can see it's a good mix, and the numbers of male and female are really quite similar. So people are feeling safe within our environment. And you can see there are people who see the well-being benefits. So there's a really important sort of all this nature conservation. They're looking at how it benefits them. And one of the really big answers was we're coming for the fresh air. And when we explored fresh air, it was the sort of interaction with nature and the wider environment that they were looking at. And people love to come to nice looking sites with nice activity. As you can tell from Bickershaw, where it went from 10,000 to 60,000 in like 3 years. So really good numbers of population, flora and fauna improvements. So there's been some really good pieces of work there to show what is causing these ecosystem service changes. So we've done quite a lot of monitoring and data collection to explore what makes the sites work for people and what the other ecosystem benefits are. So clearer water because we've reduced the iron pollution, the amount of extra wetland, the way that people come to visit the streams now flowing across the landscape and walk beside them, watching the kingfishers dive in. So in conclusion, we've done this case study, and it's shown and demonstrated how the flood mitigation sits alongside delivering biodiverse rich habitats and the provision of a safe and welcoming outdoor environment, places where people actually want to come and enjoy the wildlife and the countryside, and they can take responsibility for their own health. They can come and they go, we want to come out and walk, it makes us feel good. They can paddle and take up dragon boating. There's the opportunities within this biodiverse landscape to do these things, and it's all within the industrial and post-industrial areas of the northwest of England, places that were only 10, 20 years ago covered in grey colliery spoil, with antisocial behaviour, tipping, and lots of sort of deprived communities. So we've got that opportunity to promote the social and cultural well-being of the population locally in the Greater Manchester, Wigan and Merseyside area. So thank you very much for listening. That was the...
Thank you, Mark. This was really fantastic. Your great job in Wigan, which, as I was mentioning at the beginning, is one of the cities which are included in the Greater Manchester Authority. And please allow me now to give the floor to Noura Hisham, who is academic working at the University of Salford, in particular a team member of the Ignition project. And please, could you, Noura, share your slides on the screen? And I would like to really remind the concept of a quadruple helix and how innovation can be achieved by putting together academia, business, public institutions, and obviously communities. And this conference today is an attempt to give voice to the different components which can bring innovation. Without innovation, we cannot make this transition from something that we know into something that we don't know. And as anticipated, cutting fossil fuel emissions is not sufficient. We need to take a proactive approach and to restore a restorative approach, as in the cases that we have shown so far, City of Trees, the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. But it's now time to have a look at the details of the Ignition project, which was mentioned already in previous talks. Thanks, Noura, for shedding light on the approach of Ignition and for expanding on this for us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for inviting me as well. Actually, yes, it has been mentioned by Pete and Krista, and that is actually related to the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and City of Trees being partners on Ignition as well. So this is actually one of the very strong points about Ignition project, is bringing together different perspectives, all aiming towards saving or providing finance business case for Greater Manchester. So basically, I'm Noura Hisham. I'm an academic, as Claudia mentioned, at the University of Salford, and I'm going to shed a little bit of light on the details related to Ignition project. And basically, if I want to start, it's around developing innovative financing. So what we're doing basically is working on different scales in order to make sure that we can invest in financing, and we can make sure that investors and different stakeholders want to have greater input within the natural environment and green infrastructure. So if I start, let me just, yeah. So just to start with, I wanted to show this photo, and if you'd allow me, I will end with this photo as well. So this is the final product, or part of the final product, of the Ignition Living Lab at the University of Salford. And what we have here is additional retrofitted green infrastructure, but that is not all that it is. There's a lot of layers and a lot of different details that go underneath this development and underneath this, this facility that I'm going to highlight within the presentation. And hopefully by the end, when we look at this photo again, we might see something different. As Claudia mentioned, the idea is to take forward strategies and to make sure that they are implemented in reality. And this is basically what Ignition is about. We do have a greater vision, we do have a greater aim, but at the same time, we understand that we need to develop these through partnerships. And we do want to develop an investment case built on evidence. So we understand the importance of numbers and importance of having case studies and experimentation on ground. And this is where the Ignition Living Lab that I showed the photo of comes in. So this is basically what I'm going to be mentioning today. So to start with, the different partners that I'm going to mention just in a second have looked into how to fit Ignition project within the bigger image, basically. So there is a lot of effort and there is a lot of strategy development going into Greater Manchester Combined Authority, as Krista mentioned, and there are a lot of different strategies going into the direction of natural environment. And this is where we started with. So we started by tackling one of the major challenges for the environment identified by GMCA. And we started looking at how we can fit within this natural environment challenge and how we can basically build on people, place, and economy as the major driver. So we do need a lot of people to be more engaged and more aware of the emergency and how we can tackle that through nature-based solutions. We do need to identify where those would be and how to start looking into retrofitting, because cities, for example, for a 2038 or 2050 approach, most of the urban structures within cities already exist. So understanding where we can retrofit different solutions and uplift the existing infrastructure, this would be another challenge. And the third thing, and maybe the most important, is to make sure that we can finance that. So to understand where the investment is and how to make people want to invest in green infrastructure, whether it's stakeholders from the private sector, public sector, and the public as well. So what we looked into is identifying those steps through knowing what the existing evidence is, identifying what the potential finance could be, and then taking that into a different scale through identifying the spaces, as I mentioned, and identifying how and what kind of interventions we can do, and then making sure that these are replicable for different stages. So we do want to generate investment, but we do want to base that on real-time data and benefits that are monetized. Going back to the partnerships that I mentioned earlier, we have 12 partners on the project. We are a large 4.5 million euros UIA project. And what we're trying to do is to uplift Greater Manchester green infrastructure with a target of 2038 in hand. And if we can look at this slide, we will see that the different partners are actually from a lot of different perspectives. So for example, the local authorities, we have the Environment Agency on board as well, City of Trees, of course. We have academics from Manchester and Salford universities. And we do have different stakeholders focusing on engagement as well, making sure that we take whatever data and information that we gather within Ignition to the public to make sure that they're on board as well. And this is just the start of building those partnerships. So we do have the existing partners, but we are aiming to have an outreach to other stakeholders to make sure that they are on board with the project, to make sure that we can take the steps that we have made within Ignition further beyond the project. So basically, if we talk about the different scales of intervention, that's on so many different levels as well. So we start with the urban scale. We do have an urban mapping tool for green infrastructure, and that is developing sort of a mapping of what is already existing and how we can measure the uplift. And that is on a Greater Manchester scale. So understanding this on an urban scale, and then identifying from that the sites that can be developed through finance and financial models. And this is another part of the project, which is basically building on the evidence and making sure that we build investor confidence through different business cases. And this then is related to on-ground experimentation. And this is where the Living Lab comes in hand as well, which is providing data, providing an on-ground showcase for all these different scales. So making sure that we can provide data to support and build this investor confidence. And this takes me to the part of the project which I have been most involved in within the past 3 years. And this is basically building the nature-based solutions living lab on the University of Salford campus. And there is a lot that I can talk about here. I'm going to just try to give you a little bit of an overview of the process and leading up to the final product. And there are so many lessons learned throughout this process that we have learned and we are aiming to take forward to others within the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, different stakeholders. So we started with the design, and the most important thing about the design of the Living Lab is that it's a co-design process. So it was not developed in one stage, and it was not developed by one person. It was developed through an iterative process of stakeholder engagement, of partner engagement, making sure that we integrate all the different aspects and all the different perspectives. For example, within the University of Salford, as we are an academic entity, we had to take into consideration the estate's point of view as the main operator of the campus, because this is a retrofitted facility, and the local authorities as well. And the point that the previous panelists mentioned about making sure that the policies provide support for green infrastructure. So we did do that within the process, and we started to look into where we are. So basically we have a very interesting situation being within a university campus as a bigger entity. And we do have access to Peel Park campus and within a community as well of Salford. So we do have involvement from the community as well. So we started by setting a strategy, understanding where we are as a living lab. And this is basically by providing a concept. So we started looking into what sort of NBS solutions we want to include, and how can we push for experimentation rather than just including what is out there in the market. This was quite an important point for us to take into consideration. We started developing the Living Lab as a prototype, making sure that its implementation is providing data and information in the process itself, and then making sure that this can be retrofitted somewhere else and taken to different contexts. So we started developing this strategy and this approach through the different parts of the process of building the Living Lab. So starting with the design, the procurement, construction, and then making sure that we capitalize on this investment and convey the technology and what is beyond the technology as well. Obviously, that was done as well with input from different stakeholders. As I mentioned, we did have workshops to gather the opinions of different stakeholders from the private sector, from the community, to make sure that we have everybody's perspective in plan for the development. And then we started looking at how this can be retrofitted on campus, and the design of the Living Lab has gone through a lot of iterations, as I mentioned. One of those is basically related, the first one actually was basically related to making sure that it's different. So what we have here is as a main idea is making sure that the sum of all the parts is bigger than having separate items, which basically means that if you have a green roof on its own, it will give you a certain amount of benefit. However, if you have this green roof connected to a green wall, connected to suds trees, connected to a rain garden, and all this is an integrated system, the benefits are much more than if you had those unconnected on their own. And this has proven to be very, very successful, especially with the case of our campus, because then the effect and impact of having the Living Lab was much higher on the whole campus than just the footprint of the collective enterprises, interventions, apologies. So basically, after making sure that we have the design in hand, we started looking into the procurement process. And this was quite challenging as well. First of all, because we are a research entity. So looking into how to tackle that from a construction perspective was quite challenging. So we do have a lot of strategies and research to back up our approach, but taking that into reality was a different story. So for example, we started by dividing. The first thing that we did, and it was quite a successful step, was to make sure that we take the development of the living lab on 2 phases rather than 1. And that made sure that we include the experimentation even in the process of procurement. So we looked into having the rain garden as a phase 1 and having a bigger phase 2 with green roof, green wall, and sustainable urban drainage trees. We did have a lot of consultations, as I mentioned. We did have a lot of development of the tender documentation to make sure that the integration of experimentation is quite explicit within the text. So making sure that whichever contractor is assigned to the project takes that into consideration and makes sure to deliver on experimentation. That is also one of the biggest lessons learned, is that we do need to push forward experimental approaches with the public sector and with firms operating within the market. The other part was making sure that the assigned contractor was quite flexible with the designs, making sure that we had a conversation ongoing with the university, with the contractor, and with the partners. So that has been kept quite frequent alongside the construction. And one very, very lucky thing that happened was that the contractor for phase 1 and phase 2 turned out to be the same contractor. They bidded for phase 1 and phase 2. Even though it was very close, however, we did see that this has supported phase 2 and made a lot of connections to phase 1. So consistency along the process was quite important as well. Just looking to the timeline, we did have a lot of delays because of COVID. However, we did manage to take through phase 1 and phase 2 in 2020 and phase 2 in 2021. And right now we do have the whole design on campus, and we're taking forward the monitoring, as I will mention in a bit. Coming on to the design connections, as I mentioned earlier, this is the connection that we have, the rain garden on the very far left of the screen, and the phase 2 basically consisting of the green roof, green wall, and the suds trees, with a connection in between of an attenuation volume that makes sure that a lot of water is attenuated and pumped back into the installation. This is just to mention, this is actually an integrated closed system, so with an overflow. So what we have is an automated monitoring plan. And what we have is that whatever part of the living lab needs water, this is pumped back from the central area to each individual asset or part of the living lab. And that makes sure to maintain everything and to make sure that green infrastructure, which is one of the biggest hurdles for green infrastructure, is that sometimes we go for passive solutions, but if we don't have, within an urban setting specifically, if we don't have a plan for drought season, if we don't have a plan for overflow, that might compromise the long-term development and ongoing life of the project. And I just wanted to mention here that what we based the design on was basically relationships related to hydrology. So we do have a lot of underground intersections between the different parts of the living lab, and we do have the main driver as where the water comes from and where it's going, and that we can see in this slide in the coming one. So for example, if we go through the rain garden, it is divided into 4 sections, and that is basically because the main water input is related to the water pipes coming down from the roof. I'm not going to talk a lot of detail detail on this, but I just wanted to mention that even though we can see the design here, if we overflow where the water comes from, it will show quite a different story. So for example, the water comes from one side through the roof, and it flows through the rain garden. There is another input as well, which goes into another area. And then the third and fourth input go into the fourth area, and underneath those areas are a sustainable underground pit as well, which acts as an attenuation volume for the whole rain garden. So we do have a flow of water going from one sustainable solution to the other, including a suds tree, including passive solutions that are added with a little bit of automation that I mentioned through pumping the water whenever needed. We do have a green wall there as well, and the attenuation volume on the other end. So all this system on a whole, even though in a very small area of the rain garden, was quite important to have through. If we go to the design of phase 2, we will see that it has basically been a connection between the between the living wall, the green roof, and the suds trees. And the idea here was, as I mentioned, to collate all those together through the attenuation volume in the middle, and making sure that this is the heart of phase 2. And making sure that the water is pumped back whenever needed. And adding to that, we do have the monitoring of the data is not just for maintenance, but rather for collating a lot of information about the different parts of the living lab, as I will mention in a bit. So basically that brings me to the research, data, and monitoring part, which is what happens underground and what happens offsite. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of connections, but those connections feed into data. So we do have monitors regarding water flow, water levels. We have soil moisture sensors. We have heat flux plates, and making sure that we measure the heat for inside and outside the building envelope. So we have that for the green roof and the green one. We do measure the biodiversity, and last but not least, the human interaction. So the effect of having more green infrastructure on campus, on the campus users and the students. And in addition to having all this data through our platform and our sensors, we do have screens on campus as well for phase 1 and phase 2 to make sure that this data is conveyable to the public. So whenever you're standing within the living lab, you can see the data that is ongoing and that is being collated. And if you're a member of the public, you can directly relate to that. If you're a researcher, you can go for more details through the detailed data on our platform. So all this works together. It's a lot of different small pieces, and then there is a connection between all those pieces, and then making sure that all this is conveyed to partners to inform the investment plans and to inform basically the development of the business case, to make sure that this is taken forward after the project. Last but not least, now that we are done with the construction of the living lab, we do have a huge engagement plan, and that is done with our engagement partners in BITC and through the other partners definitely as well, making sure that we convey whatever is happening, that we convey all the data and all the work that has been done as an example, as a precedent that can be taken forward to other sites. So we have had a lot of engagement from different stakeholders. We've had a lot of government representatives. We've had ministers. We've had the head of the EA as well, and Howard Boyd, attending to the Living Lab, and quite interested in seeing how this can be taken forward. So we are coming to the last 6 months of the project. We finalized the project in the end of April 2022. But this is where we're starting to look into further development of the project beyond ignition. So there is a lot of funding being looked into. There is a lot of collaborations beyond the partners, as I mentioned in the beginning, and we are looking forward to making sure that ignition impact well surpasses the project time. And the last thing, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is this same photo. So now that we look at the green wall and the space on campus that you saw in the earlier sketches, we can see that there is a lot of infrastructure going behind this green wall. There is a lot of connections underground, a lot of connections with the building, the existing building. There is a lot of connections to other areas on campus. And this is what we're trying to do within Ignition, is to make sure that we not only experiment with certain types of green infrastructure, but to actually work with making sure that these are connected, these are retrofitted, and these are doable on ground on our existing urban areas. So if you'd like to have further look, I will paste some links in the chat now. And there's a lot of different strategy documents, a lot of different reports that have been developed through the project and within the Ignition Living Lab as well. We have a lot of information on the website if you'd like to have more information on that. So that's all from my side, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Noura. This was just brilliant. And I can see how Krista has added a link to the Greater Manchester Natural Capital 2021, which is the annual conference. Is just there is a wealth of materials available online. I have also uploaded a couple of links to a short film on the case study of the Lancashire post-industrial landscape discussed by Mark Champion, and I have uploaded a link to the Ignition Living Lab in Salford. I can see that Sophie from the city of Manchester has joined us. Hi Sophie, thank you very much. I think that the Ignition project couldn't be better complemented than with the Grow Green project, which the city of Manchester is contributing to, and I think that it's a great case that Sophie would like to share with us with a very brief presentation. Thank you very much, Sophie, for your time. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name's Sophie Shield. I work for the City of Manchester. I'm going to talk to you a bit today about West Gorton Community Park, which was one of the 3 demonstration projects of the Grow Green Horizon 2020 project. We do have lots of elements of sods, water management, as lots of the other people have referred to in presentations already. I'm going to talk to you specifically about the biodiversity considerations that we had within the project. So just to give you an idea about the Grow Green project, it's a 5-year Horizon 2020 project under the topic demonstrating innovative nature-based solutions for climate and water resilience in cities, and it started in 2017. So West Gorton Community Park in Manchester is the park that I'm going to talk to you about. It's Manchester's demonstration project, and it sits alongside 2 other demonstration projects in Valencia and Wrocław in Poland. And actually 2 of our following cities, Modena, which you all might know, and Brest in France, have also implemented their own sort of mini demonstration projects as well, which they're looking into. So all the demonstration projects, Manchester, Valencia, Wrocław, are researching the effects of nature-based solutions on thermal and water stress obviously, there's quite a difference between the climate of Valencia and the climate here in Manchester. They have more of a focus on heat. We have more of a focus on water, and Wrocław, being in Poland, in the middle of the continent, are looking at a sort of hybrid approach, climate, heat and water. But we're also all looking into the health and well-being effects of our new green infrastructure and social inclusion, as well as seeing what we can monitor in terms of the economic impact of our projects. So, to give you a flavour of where we implemented our demonstration project, this was the first new municipal park in Manchester for many, many years. This is the area of West Gorton. It's a highly deprived area, poor quality housing, high unemployment, poor health outcomes for residents. So West Gorton Community Park represented the final elements of a 10-year regeneration programme that had been happening in this area, which included demolition of the likes of the houses that you can see on the larger picture. That's an office block there that was also demolished, replaced by new social and private housing, a new facility for digital, a new community hub with doctor's surgery, various improvements to the school. So this park was kind of in the centre of that regeneration area. So this was the perfect place to put it, and desperately needed, as you can see from the other photos, a bit of improvement to just make this area something where residents would be proud to be living. So how did we go about designing biodiversity into this project? So as I mentioned, the Grow Green project is obviously a climate change project. And we had established, alongside our research partners at the universities in Valencia and Wrocław, and our own partner at the University of Manchester, we'd established a series of possible key performance indicators which our demonstration projects could look into. That was quite a long list. So we held a series of workshops in Manchester with our local partners to kind of narrow down the sort of key design drivers, if you like, that we would have for the park. So as you can see, we held a couple of workshops attended by the landscape architect who we commissioned for the scheme, the research team from the University of Manchester, the local social housing provider, and also municipal officers in departments such as green infrastructure strategy, regeneration, housing, various things like that. So we narrowed the KPIs which we wanted to particularly focus on down to water retention. The area in West Gorton where we were building the park was identified by the Environment Agency as an area at risk of surface water flooding. So we wanted to look at how the park could mitigate that. Thermal stress, we're monitoring air temperature and humidity around the park, biodiversity, and also a large programme of monitoring around health and well-being and social inclusion, and how the park improves those outcomes for people in West Gorton. So obviously, as I've said, the residents are really quite important when designing such a park. So we contracted a local environmental NGO to engage with our citizens, both around their general aspirations for the park. You know, what do they actually need? It is going to be, as well as a research sort of site. It is also a local park that needs to serve the needs of this community. So we took the opportunity to consult with them both around general park design. Obviously they wanted play facilities, things like that, but also to have a conversations with them about what their understanding was about nature-based solutions. And we did find that biodiversity was important to local residents. So here we are. This is what we came up with. As I said, the landscape architect who we contracted worked alongside the University of Manchester's monitoring team and utilised citizens' comments on the design to design up the scheme for the park. So in terms of biodiversity, we retained existing trees wherever we could. I do remember the first time I went to the park when it was newly built, the trees looked amazing. And when you'd been to the park before, the trees were not something that you noticed. So they've been very cleverly integrated into the design to retain the existing trees. And we've also planted new native and fruiting trees, for example, in bioretention tree pits, which we're also studying the in and outflow of water into. Planting was chosen with biodiversity in mind and also to withstand wet conditions. So in that top right picture there, you can see one of our swales that's taking water in from that road, you can see, and it runs into the channel at the bottom. And you can see that the turf on the slopes of the swale is different to the grass surrounding it. It's a special turf with water resistant species in it. So those sorts of considerations were made around the biodiversity. So as I said, it is a demonstration site, a living lab, as the Ignition project also is. So what are we doing in terms of monitoring? So the biodiversity is being monitored on this site and on the sites in Valencia and Wrocław, using the Shannon index, which is measuring the number of species and their relative abundance. So a fairly straightforward monitor, but something that can be applied and compared to sites, you know, beyond the Grow Green project. If we wanted to compare our site to other sites across the UK and Europe, then we could using this index. So a baseline was taken by the University of Manchester. This is the site before construction took place. As you can see, it's a brownfield site. However, because it was a brownfield site that had been there for quite some time, it was actually quite species rich. Lots of seeds had travelled there over a number of years and taken root. So actually the initial baseline did show in all three of the parks, shown by the boxes which are sort of flowery looking, that the number of plant species actually was quite high within this index, and the number of tree species being a little lower, that you can see shown in the green leafy boxes there. So what are we doing on the next steps? There'll be a further biodiversity survey next summer. The Grow Green project is ending in November 2022. So there'll be one more biodiversity survey, and then there'll be a biodiversity impact report. So a thematic report across all three of the Grow Green demonstration sites, which will compare and contrast our biodiversity impacts across those sites. The University of Manchester are going to continue biodiversity monitoring. It will be a living lab beyond the end of the Grow Green project, because they have a baseline. It's got really good potential for additional research, and they also appreciate that perhaps there may be more to add to the story than just 2 years post-construction. As we all know, biodiversity can take significantly longer than 2 years to embed itself, especially when you've had large machinery going all over the site. There'll also be a continued programme of Seeing is Believing tours to inspire and engage not only citizens, sort of municipal colleagues from other areas, businesses. We're already seeing that it's facilitating lots of conversations that we weren't able to have before within Manchester and beyond. So I think that's everything from me. There's a couple of links there that you might find useful. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie. This was just great. And I also would like to thank the Direttore Città Resilienti Piero Pellizzaro from the city of Milano for joining us for a final comment on the transferability of the cases that we have been presenting on screen today. So I would like really to thank everybody. Nick White gave us a fantastic overview of what Natural England has done so far, clarifying that the mandatory requirement for calculating the biodiversity net gain will have a significant impact in the way in which biodiversity will need to be embedded in the planning practice in the near future. In the UK, Krista, Patrick offered us an overview on what's going on in the Greater Manchester Combined Authority area, which comprises of 10 cities in the Greater Manchester area, which are all lined up to be ready to go once this requirement of calculating biodiversity net gain becomes compulsory. And we had a great opportunity to listen from both academics, researchers, and the community engaged associations such as the Lancashire Wildlife Trust or City of Trees, what is happening on the ground, to great research project Grow Green, presented by Sophie from Shale from the City of Manchester, and Ignition Living Lab on sustainable urban nature-based solutions applied to the Salford Living Lab, and explained by our colleague Noura Eishan, but also the two great experiences of rewilding Wigan, presented by Mark Champion from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust, or rewilding areas and even incorporating more trees in cities, as discussed by Pete Stringer from City of Trees. So I hope that this was really a great opportunity to be exposed to extant cases. These are all real projects which are happening on the ground in parallel, while the City of Manchester is trying to become more resilient through by embedding the requirements of the biodiversity net gain forthcoming new regulations in the near future. So hopefully this kind of a snapshot on the UK with a focus on Manchester has offered all our Italian colleagues in this great platform of Urbanpromo the opportunity to learn about different cases which are going on here in Manchester, and possibly establishing a more even partnership in the future across the cities. I know, Piero, that you are a champion of sustainability, resilience in a city, Milano, which is hosting Urbanpromo today, both as a virtual as a real setting. So I really thought that it would have been great to listen from you. What is your reaction to the opportunity of learning from Manchester, from the UK case study? And I also know that you also know very well the City of Trees activity. So I really would like to ask you if you could give us some final comments on peer learning across the cities and knowledge sharing on this topic of biodiversity. Thank you very much, Piero.
Hi, Claudia. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Almost good afternoon, actually. Since here, actually, we know very well Manchester. We had worked with the City of Trees. We have exchanged knowledge. We have exchanged participation in different meetings. They came to Milan. They showed us what was their way of organizing the association, the funding, and all the engagement with the different stakeholders that we have in the city. Actually, we as a City of Milan, we are running the Forestami program. It is the 3 million tree program before 2030 in the metropolitan area of Milan, in collaboration with the Polytechnic of Milano and the metropolitan government and the major parks in the city. And what we have designed as a governance of the program and as well the funding scheme that we have adopted was so much based on Manchester experience, because then it's where we stand together with similar goals. But on the other hand, is also how we can create a common, let's say, demand for investment with a similar perspective. Because when we compare cities, year by years, I become quite skeptical in comparing cities among the others, because every city has a different legislation. Every city has a different funding scheme. Every city has a different framework for public bids. And even among the same cities, there is different way, or metropolitan area, we have different kind of coverage. So the most common way to create a common demand for investment, common investment scheme, is start working in a similar way, and not only comparing, it's working, put on the side, makes feasible. This has happened as well when also we have listened to different kind of solution has been adopted in terms of green infrastructures and tree planting or natural-based solution. Here it's something that has always been, really complicated for us to move or to look at the experience in, in Netherlands, or Manchester as well, because there is different kind of scheme in managing the profit coming from water, or where is the budget allocated for health, if you have to measure the health impact. So I think that what we have seen that in this exchange is helping us to get inspired, but as well to identify which is the different issue, the different task, or the different characteristic that has been required to be adapted to the context. So sometimes we need to look more, less at the technical things, or at the beginning looks at the technical, and more at the legal and economic framework of different solutions around different things. And then it's something that it's requiring an integration, even among researchers, among the different experience of multi-professional teams that have been dealing and working on these topics. Because otherwise the replication is not properly designed. So when we start working with Manchester on, we got this, I think it was the Biodiversity Working Group of the Resilient Cities Network. At that time it was named the 100 Resilient Cities Network. Now it's the Global Resilient Cities Network. And then we moved to forestation. We were in conversation with Manchester, with Melbourne, the couple. And all these things has been quite complicated to mean, it has been complicated in defining the financial and governmental solution or scheme of the event. So then it's something that we've been like looking and move to other financial group. So we moved from urban forestation group or the biodiversity group, and then we moved to the financial group. So the new business model group. Say on the financial group, we have this kind of complication. How we can then deal with the financial aspect, and then it's when we become important for make this the challenging of becoming a collaborative approach with Manchester. It become really more concrete because we couple the different demands of requirements of move forward. So in this framework, the collaboration with the different cities for us is essential to learn, but it's also essential to try to push us in getting more and more skill and to be more adaptive to the different need that is coming, even in terms of opportunity and things. So the city is now facing a new phase because we are moving through the implementation of the recovery plan, the Recovery and Resilience Facility Fund created by the European Commission, and when there is again new standards. New standard in terms of indicators, as they're not significant harmful legislation that was even not caught in this conversation, and then it's something that it's even more important because improve the circularity and reduce of resources in the different capacity, and it is normal. So it's always been updating and upgrading on this, and so then it's another important element. But finally, what I think it was the most successful collaboration between Manchester and Milan was how we should engage the private and individuals and the community and the association in being part of a challenging process of rethinking or bringing back nature into the city. Then is when we got successful stories to share, because it's where you get the proper way to engage and to come back to people on what is their ultimate goal, and so to improve the livability of the city. So I think that it's the Urbanpromo the Urbanpromo experience that is being Milan today. It's a momentum when we need to look to present what we are doing, but also to have conversation to our scaling in a different content, different situation. And I think it should be open to a conversation when other professionals, other schemes come into this and start the conversation. If we only have a conversation among the one that are already engaged in designing green, implementing green, is where it could be good. But if we want to get more, we need to get open to other kind of domain when we can improve the capacity of planning. So in my opinion, then it's where we stand. And I think there will be only the beginning of a long conversation with Manchester. But we got with Manchester, we also start another one today. Another final announcement is that we become the Resilience Hub, Milan and the Great Manchester, with Katie Oldham, Ana Gaves in Barcelona, and police from Helsingborg. So we have become the Resilience Hub of the United Nations, making city resilient 2030. So, and I think that the urban forestation and the greening should be one of the pillars that we all together, Barcelona, Milan, and Manchester, has where we're going to share our capacity with the other European cities. So I'm glad to be part of a new journey with Manchester, and I wish to all of us a more resilient future for our community. So thank you very much, Claudia. And sorry if I cannot stay more, but it's kind of, as you know, it's a busy time. I'm sorry for this.
Thank you very much, Piero, for these final remarks and kind of creating, reinforcing this bridge between the UK and Italy through active collaborations and hope for further increase of the collaboration in the future and knowledge sharing and mutual learning. Thank you very much. And thanks for taking the time to join today this event. I would now like to open the floor to more questions and to any further comments that may arise from the public. If any of the attendees would like to take the floor or to contribute through the chat, feel free to let us know, because it's really now time to discuss the final questions in the chat box, and also to see if there is any further a contribution that may be raised from the floor. In the meantime, looking at the chat box, I can see that a question was, I forgot to read loud a question which has been asked, I think following the Mark Champion talk, which is about how is there any plans and solutions for areas which were used for chemical industries and caused the damage to the soil, as well as areas which can be turned in something we can benefit from and encourage biodiversity. I think, Mark, this question was for you. And please, can I encourage whoever wishes to add more questions in the chat box to do it now, so that I can read them following the answer of Mark. Thank you, Mark.
Yep. Obviously, different sites have different chemicals. We are fortunate in Wigan, that area, that most of the spoils are quite old. And a lot of the pollution has disappeared. So we are left with some relatively simple chemicals, such as iron pyrites, which will break down into sulfuric acid and iron, but they are both those are quite easy to mitigate. So most of our area, we have quite simple chemicals. We don't have the more complicated pollutions, but we always do soil samples to check the nature of any chemical residues left. But we're quite good at things like iron pyrites and some of the chemicals within fly ash and so on. So we are able to mitigate those with things like reed and Typha. So Phragmites australis and Typha latifolia are both quite good at mitigating many of the standard chemicals that we find in our spoils.
Thank you very much, Mark. I just wonder whether is there any further question that anyone may wish to raise. And yeah, I've seen the web link that has been now circulated by Krista is really exciting. Please allow me to put it on screen. So this is really groundbreaking news. And as we are speaking about Greater Manchester and Milano, we couldn't have been more timely with this event today, and hopefully more can be expanded. That we can expand more on the Greater Manchester case study as a front runner on the resilient solutions. If there are no further questions in the chat box and no further contributions, I shall bring apologies from Anna De Silva, who due to unforeseen circumstances couldn't join us today, and I would like to thank everybody for attending this event today, which was extraordinarily well attended, and further request of watching it later on the recorded version were also sent during the morning. So in addition to the rich participation of today, we expect more and more people watching the recording of today's event. So I really would like to thank again all the panelists for taking the time to join this event in full today, which has been made possible by the Urbanpromo. framework created by the National Institute of Urban Planning, INU. So I'm really grateful to INU Urbanpromo for creating the opportunity for us to have such a great discussion, which hopefully will still have more and more people interested in learning and watching all these cases. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.